not only are you just starting, but you're also teaching yourself. Like, I just created this thing, and now I know some of the challenges that I'm going to encounter when I make the next iteration.
We need to create a healthy audience in our mind that we are creating, to knowing that they're gonna now like be impressed by what we did, the fact that we actually did it, right? And like really wants to understand like the challenges we went through and the triumph.
It's crazy that actually works, and it's happened to me several times where I'm just like, I don't know, I have nothing, and just look in front of you and start doing something.
And that's when I was like, wait a second. If we just like change our mindset to like, okay, I have this idea, all I have to do is... Hi, my name is Sharan.
Hi, my name is Ben.
And this is the Creative Odyssey Podcast.
We're here to talk about the creative process.
The good,
the bad,
and the ugly.
But more importantly,
we're here to create together.
Whether you're a creator, a dreamer,
or just curious about the creative process,
explore with us
as we figure out what it means to be a creative
and build a community
that celebrates the creative journey. Let's get started.
Welcome to the Creative Odyssey Podcast. This is episode 6. My name is Ben.
And I'm Sharan.
And last time, if you were with us, we were discussing just the desire to refine our own creative process. We just want to be authentic in how we create things, and we really wanted to figure out how we felt just with our whole process as it exists right now. The next thing that we understood was that when we first discovered that initial rush of creation that I feel like every creative gets, we shouldn't expect that initial rush at the end of the process. So, in fact, we should almost plan out what the vision should look like, what that feeling should look like at the end when we finish creating something.
Yeah, absolutely. And it was cool because the conversation started with like us talking about creative blocks, right? And yep. And I'm grateful we went down this path, because before just like going down a list of creative blocks and how we overcome those things, it's super cool to understand like what's actually happening and why are we, following the idea, and why do we get a block and all of that stuff. So it was super cool just to understand that like, okay, there's a flaw in the system where we are trying to follow that initial rush at the end of a process, when technically you almost need to have an idea of like what kind of feeling you're going to have at the end of a process or a creative process.
Right.
And once that came up about, I was like, oh my gosh, this is cool. It was like that there is something to this here.
Yeah. So we got to dig deeper into this.
Yes.
Right? So
yes.
In this episode, we're going to figure out some creative solutions to the blocks by understanding the process, or the creative odyssey, or whatever you want to call it, and what it actually looks like, or what we think it should be. So we want to start by breaking that down and getting into it this way.
All right. So I think to like go further on, I think we had to first understand like what the creative process looked like and break it down. Because Ben and I sat down and we had this butcher block paper, and if you all check our Instagram, you all can see like we were literally like just what, how, I don't know, I think 3 hours. I think
it was 3 hours, yeah, at least, yeah. And I didn't even feel like it was 3 hours, but man, we were getting
because the thing is to solve a problem. Let me just preface by saying this: like, we did some research, but what we really wanted to do was like help each other understand our creative blocks. And so like this is all like personal examples, like, and really breaking it down and all of that stuff. So yeah, so when we broke the process down, it was, you have the initial dopamine, the rush, right? And as far as any creative would say, like once you have that spark, that's it, right? Like you can go and do whatever you are supposed to do at that point. There are creatives who plan that out in their head, or some people just like, this is kind of like an idea what I want to do, and they will just follow that and all that kind of stuff. So it was that initial feeling that fueled everything. Now the problem was, like I said, mentioned, was like that when that feeling is gone, what do you do?
What do you do?
And so then we were like, okay, if the feeling is gone, then we could try to remember the feeling and like constantly relive it as when every time you would hit a mental block. Now, for some people, like I think you, for example, you said you could technically do that and try it out and see if,
Yeah, to see if I can re-energize myself by like kind of hanging on to that dopamine hit.
Remembering it and like what that feeling looks like, literally. And the thing is, like, it's hard to do that, like, in that one.
It really is. It's super hard to hang on to that. Like, it's just so natural the way that it kind of floods a creative when you get that inspiring spark or whatever you want to call it, the dopamine rush. But I feel like your body doesn't naturally produce that if you're not having that inspirational time right there.
Yeah.
So trying to hold on to it is very difficult.
Right. So that's difficult, right? It's doable, but difficult. So I don't know about you, but we don't like difficult. I don't like difficult. So that's when I was like, okay, so then what's the purpose of this? Because then easily, like as a person like you who create for fun, and if something doesn't work, you can just go on to the next thing and not even have any like bad feelings about it or negativity around it. Like that's okay. But I think for our podcast goal is to say, you're a creative, you should create. And you should be creating for the sake of creating. You should be creating because you were kind of made to do that. As a creative person, you absolutely must create so you can process and you can express yourself in a healthy manner, period. And the beautiful thing is what comes out of that is art. What comes out of that is beautiful. What comes out of that is raw, right? So, and so the log line is that our goal and our mission is to help people create just to create. And that's when I got this example. I remember this example of Beethoven, the composer, classical composer. Most of his best work came out when he was deaf. Like he was going deaf, and like he right, like in everything he created, it literally flowed through him, right? And in that moment, he knew all he had to do was create, right? There was no like, will they like it? None of those. This guy can't even hear.
That's just crazy. I mean, insane. It's crazy to think that he was so in tune with just creating, he couldn't even hear it.
Yeah.
And he just, I think I remember hearing some stories or reading some stories where once he's like completely lost his hearing, it was like he was playing the piano and he could feel the vibrations kind of.
Yeah.
Imagine creating something with that type of disability.
Yeah.
Like that raw desire to create, just to create, is something that I think we need to tap into a lot more. Like just create to create, just do it.
Right. Like if you're a photographer or a videographer, like go outside and record something. Or even if you don't go outside, like look at something around you and try to make it look cinematic if that's your thing. It's like lately, like I've had this vision, like you can see this right here, like this is an idea. This is 3 pieces of wood glued together, and I laser engraved, put epoxy, and I wanted something artistic that has some kind of fluidness to it, where I can look at it and be like, you know what, like this is not threatening to me. Right?
Yeah.
Like this is very fluid, like big, like rock looking thing that falls and it's not steady. It's not supposed to be, right? And I want it to look like the creative process. And every time I feel down about it, I was like, no, that thing I made, like that was an ideation. This was something I made out of a rush. And like this is what the product of it, and like this is gonna give me motivation to like every time I look at it, like. And also I have to be honest, like it feels super nice. Like I don't know, I was like yesterday I was having a hard time editing a video in direction, and I was like playing around with it, touching it. It was super so nice. Like I don't know, it's like your green ball, but like
this my little green stress ball I play with. I totally get it. Like it's so nice to just that is great.
And I know, like, I stood there and, like, sanded every nook and cranny to make it not perfect, but smooth enough, you know, and I can go further more if I wanted to, you know that.
220, 400, 600 grit.
Exactly.
Get crazy with it.
So this is an example of, like, I had the idea and I wanted to serve a purpose. The purpose was to, like, encourage somebody struggling with creativity to go and create. So, like, that's the creation of it. So we create to create. So this is when like we had to break it down even more,
even farther.
Yep. You want to talk about that, Ben?
Yeah. So to break it down a little bit farther, we need to know how it starts, right? So we were talking about the dopamine hit. We were talking about the initial rush, and how hard that is to cling on to. So we need to so we feel that rush, right? And there's a couple of ways to move forward from there. And that's where we wanted to figure out, what are my options once I feel this rush?
That's what we call the ideation phase, correct?
Right. Yep. Ideation phase. Now we can go from there to start creating whatever we're creating. And it's difficult to just go with that flow. And I love that you created that thing that says great. It's so cool. I keep looking at it. It's so great. Anyways, so there's a couple of different ways to do that. So the first thing is you can capture that feeling of inspiration, right? And aim to relive it. Like I was saying earlier, try to relive that. So when you start to lose the inspiration, you can go back and maybe tap back into that feeling to keep going. And like I said before, it's difficult to do that. It's not easy to recapture that inspiration. The other way to do it, number 2, is to create a log line. And we mentioned this before in another episode, but this term, I don't know if he created it, but it came to us through Dan Mace, right? He's the Mr. Beast philanthropy editor. So what he does when he creates a video is he'll get the general goal, general idea, and kind of condense it down into like 3 sentences, paragraph or something like that. And that's what he calls the log line. So the log line in essence is your purpose. It's your why you're creating. Obviously you're creating just to create, but if you're moving forward, you want to have some type of purpose that you can keep looking to. So that log line is very much needed. But the third option, and this is where I think a lot of people can use the log line. The third option is to use the log line to hold on to that initial rush. So if you can attach that initial rush to the log line every time you read the log line, you might be able to recapture that inspiration.
Yeah.
So basically, when you come up with the log line, you should more or less iterate what you should feel at the end of the process.
Yeah, and the purpose.
Yep, and the purpose of creating. Yep.
Because like and the purpose has to be good enough for you to create. Like you know yourself.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
So that's cool, yeah. So the purpose and like what excites you about this.
Yep. The purpose, the goal, whatever excites you about it, that can be tied to that can be in the log line, and then you can tie that initial feeling of inspiration to the log line. Now, that's still like, I really feel like the create to create is kind of like, okay, great.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So what? Okay, yeah, I know I'm made to create, but that doesn't really help me too much. I think one thing that we really, when we were breaking this down a little bit more, we learned that creatives learn by creating, right?
Correct.
So every time you create something, you become more of yourself as a true creator. So you get the inspiration idea, you attach it to the log line, try to keep moving, and then realize when you start going, you're becoming more of yourself as a creator. You're going to have more opportunities to grow from the process. and simply express yourself by creating. So creativity is a muscle.
Yeah.
You create to create, you create to express yourself, and you're becoming a better creator. Just like when you exercise,
Right.
You're going to become stronger, you're going to build your muscles. So you attach it to the log line, you attach that feeling to the log line, you start creating, even if it's not exactly what you want, just to do it, you're going to become a better creator. So even if it's not the original idea that you came up with, just doing it is giving you a chance to build on your talents as a creative. So there's literally no strings attached, nothing to create, just to basically work out your creative muscle. Right. So this whole journey so far really doesn't make us creative block proof, right?
No.
We broke it down. We kind of understand this.
Yeah.
Okay, we can still get creative blocks. Now what?
Yeah.
Now what do we do?
Right. So the issue I saw with this process was perfectionism was attached to, or any kind of creative block was attached to the problem, the creative process, the odyssey. And that's why, like, you know, you would do something, you would have an idea, you record it, edit it, and or you record it, and like you look at the footage and it's not good, you just forget about it, right?
I stop. Yeah.
Or like the feeling is gone, etc. Now, what I realized was, we all have, when we're creating, we all have an audience kind of situation, right? Where we are like, there's kind of perfectionism attached because we want to please something or somebody from this work. And the problem was, there was so much stress and anxiety attached to it. So then I'm like, okay, if we are not creative block proof, how can we make it work? So how can we take the tension when we are creating to create this beautiful product, this vision we have? How can we take the tension out? That's when I remembered that in manufacturing or creating products or whatever, you first create a prototype. And that's when I was like, wait a second. If we just like change our mindset to like, okay, I have this idea, all I have to do is create a prototype like this, you have so much freedom.
So much freedom. It's so much simpler.
Because it doesn't have to be perfect.
It doesn't have to be perfect.
It doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't have to be like the final thing.
No.
Right?
Yeah.
And now you have the freedom to reshoot it if you need to. Like, again, if you have the budget, or even if you don't have the budget, like, you still, for the sake of telling the story, like, or completing that initial vision, you now have the freedom to reshoot it, change the storyline, whatever you need to do. But the pressure is off.
The pressure's off because it's simply a prototype. And you don't, like, it even enhances that practice of creating, you know, the muscle of creating with the prototype idea. And it's so funny. There's I feel like this idea really like blows a lot of excuses out of the water. Yeah. Like, it really does get rid of them, especially in today's day and age with the YouTube like generation that we're in, right? It's like you see somebody at the beginning of a video and they're saying, so in today's video, I'm going to create this. You watch it for 10 minutes and that exact thing that they said that they were going to create happens. So imagine how much pressure you have on yourself there creating something like that. So to release that tension, to release that pressure, build a prototype.
Yeah.
Make a prototype.
Now, absolutely. Like, so when I used to do contracting work, renovating bathrooms and things like that, I had this idea of like just doing time lapses and like putting that on Instagram and stuff. So I would just like record and on. And the thing was this though, while I was recording, I have to make sure my work looks perfect, and I have to make sure that like technically in my mind, a YouTube video starts from a bad looking bathroom to getting it completely gutted out, and then this beautiful transformation happened. And I would like meet so many kinds of challenges on the way that would like throw me off and I can't find a solution. And in that moment, like, I turn the camera off because like I have to focus on figuring out a solution here.
Oh.
Right? And then the dopamine is gone at that moment. And by the time you like spend hours sometimes trying to figure out a solution for this problem, by the time you come back, you have no energy or dopamine to like sit there and record this stupid mess you made. and everything is over. Right?
Yeah.
And so what I realized was, like, for me personally with YouTube and creating videos, it is obnoxious to assume that you're going to create this work of art or like this beautiful vision you had within a week. Technically, YouTube video is 10 minutes long and you are pretty much creating this short film.
Right.
And we look at a short film, the amount of time and effort they take into analyze everything down and the shoot and the storyline and the storyboarding, like multiple people sit there and talk about this thing that you had an idea about. So, like, to assume that you're going to get that kind of same quality every week, like, that is nuts.
That's insane.
So that's why this creating the prototype is so valuable, because now, like, okay, I'm not creating a short film. I'm creating a prototype, or I'm creating the first draft of a short film. Yeah. Maybe you have the vision of like one day, once I get good enough where I'm comfortable, I'm confident, then I can put all of these stories into one movie, because you're already good at storytelling. You're already good at all the skills, and you're really good at understanding the creative process and what that looks like. You figured out and wrote your log line and what your purpose is. And at that point, you're still creating a prototype, and you are able to continually create because you were born to create.
Yeah, it's such a beautiful thing. It gives you not only just freedom to create, but freedom to iterate. So you make prototype 1 or prototype 2, and your iterations become gradually more towards whatever it is that you're going for. And like secondary prototypes can inspire you to do something else even completely different.
And the concept of failure is gone at this point.
It is, because a prototype it's just a prototype. There's no failure in a prototype. You made something, whatever it is where it's at. There's no strings attached, no failure point whatsoever.
Exactly. Like so I really hope this concept helps you like free yourself, because like it already has like this I built within less than a week after our conversation, after we sat down and understood the process. And I was like, all right, I had this vision in my head. I even showed it to you before, like last time I was hanging out. I'm like, dude, I want to make some fluid object, and I didn't want to like waste my wood either, or even the scrap pieces. So like this is the size I had. I want to do an experiment, and I want to make a prototype. And so again, like right here like there's so prototype many flaws here. My glue lines were kind of messed up, like because my clamp was stuck. So I put some WD-40, which went into the glue crack. And so once I done, like there was like, this was warped out. And so I put some wood, like I made wood putty out of the sanding dust and whatnot. And I created this. And again, this is not perfect by all means, but the point was to make the prototype.
You know what? You succeeded in creating a prototype. You didn't fail at anything. That's exactly what that is.
Exactly. And the best part is this, though. I can still make improvements to this now.
Right. And how much did you learn?
So much.
Right?
Like, because I learned how to use the belt sander to get the bevel. Then I got this like hand sander thing, and it worked out great. Like, and again, I spent money on extra things, but like it was cool because now I'm able to create more curvy looking things and more ideas that I have, because again, the purpose was create a prototype, but the log line was for me to create something that will inspire me and maybe others.
There you go.
I achieved it.
You did.
It's not the final product, but I created a prototype.
That's wonderful, man. It's so great.
It's funny, like I did not plan this for this episode. I just brought it to show it to
I'm
you.
glad you did.
And even like keeping it in the background, I'm like super proud of this. This is super cool, like because like there's something about like having an idea in your head and like and then touching it and feeling it, like oh my gosh, like this was in my head.
There is nothing like holding something in your hand that you had in your head.
Right.
There's nothing like that. And that, just going back a little bit to that initial inspiration feeling, that rush, it's very comparative to that same feeling of holding that final product in your hand, or I'm sorry, your prototype in your hand.
Right.
So, yeah, it's a wonderful thing.
So, we can kind of go to the next level. So the concept of creating a prototype, we've gone through that, and hopefully it inspires you to create and take the pressure off. Now, the next thing we kind of wanted to like understand more is this ideation and phase.
Right.
And it's crazy we went this deep, but like we understood couple of like challenges that we face, so that we are aware of how a creative block could form.
Right. And so you kind of want to throw this against the prototype idea?
Right,
Okay.
right. Yeah. So once we had this prototype idea, we want to like have all these scenarios and see, okay, does this work in this scenario? If you're a woodworker, does it work? If you're a videographer, does it work? If you're a graphic designer, like we literally sat down and so as we did that, we wanted to like, we recognized that there are some challenges that we initially face in the ideation process. So, the first one that we saw was the idea is too big or too grand, and because of that, you won't even start for those reasons, whatever they might be. And this is pretty simple. Like you think of a too big of an idea, of a too budget, or like time consuming, right? Like my wife forced me to build her outdoor dining table, and in my head I'm thinking, what's the fastest way I can make what she wants without taking too much time, because now this is additional time, and like, you know, again, I have to create it to like make it work, and the purpose you know what I mean? So the idea is I have to make sure the wood I'm using is affordable, and the design I'm going with is not time consuming.
Right.
So that's one. Idea is too big and too grand.
So if it's too big and too grand, what if you just create a prototype? Just start there.
Right, exactly.
It kind of solves that. Like, I don't want to say solves the issue, but it makes it so much easier. It's like, oh, this idea that I just had is too big. We'll start somewhere and create the prototype for that big idea.
Right. You know, go to SketchUp and draw it up.
Yep.
You know, like that way you can visualize this thing that you're creating. Like for me, these things, I'll give my secrets away. I use Canva. I use Canva and like create this prototype and then bring it to my laser engraver and all of that stuff. Yeah. So, yeah. So
the prototype idea works for an idea that may be too big or too grand at the moment.
Yeah.
Just start somewhere, create yourself a prototype for it.
Right.
The second ideation phase challenge, this is one that hits pretty close to home and very recently too, is just poor timing. So for me, I had this initial inspiration for a video idea. It was with woodworking. I was like, man, I was high as a kite when I got that initial inspiration. Yep. Like I was like, oh my gosh, this is going to be so good. I was so excited. I like wrote it all down. I didn't do the whole like purpose thing or anything like that. I literally wrote the whole script out, including what it should look like, all the different shots. And at this time it was like probably getting close to midnight. And I'm like, okay, it's too late to shoot this right now, but I got it down. I'm going to hold on to that feeling. Right. So the next day comes around and I completely forgot about it. And I think it was not until later that next day afternoon that I was like, oh, that's right. I have this thing that I was going to shoot. And I completely lost all inspiration for it. But if I have this prototype idea, it doesn't matter what happens when I start shooting it, or if I don't necessarily like what it looks like at the very end. Mm-hmm. If I'm just creating a prototype, it doesn't matter what the timing is. Like the poor timing idea is a challenge that I feel like I could easily get over.
Yeah.
So,
and to make it better, like, and I can help you apply what we just learned. in that time period of where you were sitting down and like writing everything down, the most important thing you need to do in that moment is like writing the log line. Why am I creating this? And for what purpose must I create this prototype?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And so the moment you do that and you have that in big like bold letters, like like I am creating this to blah 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 blah. Yeah, this excites me, right? And once you've written that log line, now you can come back the next day. Okay, all right. Don't have the same feeling. Why the heck was I doing this? Why did I think of this? Because half the time when you don't have it written down, you don't remember. Because as a creative, you're already on the next idea. So finally, the final situation that we felt as a challenge in the ideation phase is the final product fallacy. Is that the same concept we've been talking about? It's you need to be creating the prototype, and instead we are thinking that we have to create the final product, and that's the fallacy there. And the answer is that's where we came up with this idea of like create the prototype for crying out loud, just create it.
Yeah, just create the prototype. It doesn't matter. These ideation phase challenges seem to really be overcome with this prototype idea. And I would really like to know, this would be for our audience here, would there be any other challenges that you've experienced? And if so, what would it look like if you were to use the prototype idea?
Right.
Like the initial inspiration, you challenge, whatever, these three things, maybe something a little bit different. We'd love to hear from you and see exactly what type of things you have come up with. And if you apply this prototype idea,
can you solve your problem?
Right. Yep. Do you resonate with these three scenarios too? Like, Are these things that you come across frequently? If so, let's try this prototype thing. Like, I'm very excited to try this. Like, this story, this woodworking video that I wanted to make. Still haven't made it. It was like a week ago that this happened to me. So I'm excited to apply what we're talking about here, which is, I'm very, very, very
we're also going to create a kind of a survey that we really want to hear from you, and like this around these principles or theories we come around with, we want to ask some questions to help understand like us, how you create and what your creative blocks look like, and any other like ways you come to overcome with. Because like the one thing that I'm always super impressed by creatives who do it for a living, like how they're able to constantly create and put out stuff. And like, I mean, I can't even like process the implications of like being paid for your work and
oh my goodness,
all that stuff.
Oh my goodness. Yeah.
I hope to bring some creative people who do it for a living into our podcast and interview them in the future, because I'm truly fascinated as a person who's trying to get into that field one day. So, all right, enough talking about all the deep down stuff. Let's actually get to some creative blocks and what they look like. You want to start with perfectionism? Yeah.
One that is dear to my heart, near and dear to my heart. Maybe not so much dear, actually, but very near to me. And that is perfectionism. This idea that whatever I'm about to create needs to be perfect, or in my mind, whatever that initial inspiration is, it needs to be exactly as I envisioned it to be. This can easily create creative paralysis. Like this has happened to me so many times where like I start to make something, or I just think about making something, and I'm like, there's no way I can do that.
Right.
There's no way I can get to that end goal, that final product, and make it look exactly like that. So what if I just create a prototype?
Yeah.
That pretty much erases that idea, right?
Yeah.
That prototype is not perfection.
Mm-hmm.
There's like, you're just making something to give you an idea of what your final product should look like or will look like. And it doesn't matter. Create one prototype, create two, create 1,000 prototypes. Really, this perfection paralysis kind of gets trumped by this whole idea.
I don't know if you know Jimmy DeResta. He's a Instagram, YouTube woodworker. He's like a godfather right now in the woodworking world. But one thing like I found was like his background is toy making and all that kinds of stuff. And he's been a builder for years. He does mechanic work, all kinds of stuff. But when it comes to woodworking or anything, even leather working, this guy, no matter how experienced he is, he sits there and like literally makes a smaller scale prototype of what he's building.
Oh,
Does not matter. Like some things he doesn't like if it's too tedious, but for the most part, and I've always wondered why is this guy taking the time to like sit there and make a small prototype, and I realized he's taking the anxiety off, the pressure
there
off.
you go. Yep.
Like you play with the kinks, and he like sometimes glues them with like little strips of wood in, and make the thing, and the pressure is off right away.
Yeah. And it's so nice too, because let's say you do create that prototype because, or you're trying to get over this perfection paralysis. Not only are you just starting, but you're also teaching yourself. Like, I just created this thing, and now I know some of the challenges that I'm going to encounter when I make the next iteration. So I think this plays right into the next creative block, which is stress or release anxiety. And what I mean by release anxiety is like when we are actually uploading a YouTube video, or when we're putting out a song, or when we're actually taking the Instagram photos of the woodworking piece we just made, right? So I feel like this is something that you and I talked about. I think it was last week, but it really opened my eyes about this whole thing. First and foremost, I've had so much perfectionism paralysis related stress to releasing things. And one of the main reasons is because of the audience that my mind is releasing it to. Like, I am thinking, like, when it really truly comes down to it, I am releasing it to somebody who is very critical, somebody who is aware of every single thing that could be wrong with it. And this like extremely, like, no creative would ever want to bring one of their products to this person to say, hey, you did a good job, because they're not going to, right?
Right.
So I have an audience of people like that in my head, that's what I'm releasing it to. Right. Of course I'm not going to. Like that's ridiculous. And going back to the whole prototype idea, like, even if I was releasing it to an audience like that, I'd be like, hey, there's a prototype. Critique it. Right. Go ahead, do your thing, man. Do your worst, right?
Help me out. Make it better.
Exactly.
Like, I think. Sorry, go ahead. My bad.
No, so I was just gonna finish the thought. Not only does the prototype idea work with that, but secondly, know the audience that or create an audience that you're going to release it to for somebody who would be like really enjoying what you're releasing. Like if you're making some type of video about something, instead of somebody who's hypercritical, what if it's like somebody who's new to this whole like field, and they're just starting out in music, for example. They're young, they've only just picked up some instruments, and they're looking to you for how you started. Like, if you have an audience of newcomers and people who are like, man, I can't wait to see what they do because I'm going to learn so much from them. Just imagine the difference that you would feel releasing that type of stuff.
Exactly. And this is, just to clarify, this is not that we don't want constructive criticism from people who don't like our work. That's not it. This is simply just saying, like, this is how we need to create a healthy audience in our mind that we're creating, to knowing that they're going to now like be impressed by what we did, the fact that we actually did it, right? And like really wants to understand like the challenges we went through and the triumph of creating a prototype, or for that matter. Like, if you create for that audience, and like I was telling Ben, like I almost want to create it to my future grandkid who, like, if I'm woodworking, who's into woodworking, right? I'm creating for that person. Like, in the moment I do that, I know like the pressure is off, because that kid is gonna see me as like, wow, he's doing what I want to do one day. And now, like, I am more excited to like up my level, like up my games and all that, level, just so that I can impress that person. So like now it's more healthy audience as opposed to somebody negative that's gonna say very negative things and won't even allow us to create in the first place.
Right. I mean, let's face it, there's always going to be trolls out there.
Oh, yeah.
There's always going to be haters, whatever the case is. But if you are creating something or building something, whatever you're doing, and thinking of, I love the idea of the grandkid who is really looking up to you, that's your audience that you're releasing it to. I mean, seriously, there's so many generations, now that I'm in my 40s, there's a couple of younger generations who are like, they can watch my stuff, listen to my stuff and be like, wow, that was so inspiring.
Yeah.
And it's just, know the audience that you're releasing it to, and make that somebody who is looking to you for inspiration.
And that's a good idea. If you can relate to that grandkid idea, create for the person, your younger you. And be like, yo, like the younger you will be like, wow, dude, like you used to be here and like you're creating this now. A younger you will never like really look down on you as long as you're doing what you were trying to do or you wanted to do in the first place.
Right.
So having a healthy audience, that's like super, super priority.
Yeah, very much so.
What else? Boredom. That one I don't have I don't think prototype works on that.
Yeah, it's a tough one. It's a tough one for sure because for me, boredom in particular will come in the middle of creating something. So I'm making a video, let's say, and I just get tired of making it. What if that's my prototype right there? That's okay. I'm here with prototype 1. I'm thinking that's fine. I don't need to be like, I feel like that just releases something in me to be like, oh, well, that's okay. Here's the first iteration.
Yeah.
Now I can go back to it and refine it.
Yeah.
So it doesn't seem like it initially works with it. And I don't know. There's so many different variances of how people can be bored. This is
the theory we're starting off. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, another thing too is overthinking it.
Yeah. Overanalyzing it. At some point or the other, you got to be like, all right, I'm only creating a prototype. Why am I spending so much time on a prototype? It makes no sense.
It really doesn't. So, okay, check. We got that one.
I do want to say something about boredom. I think it's important to understand where if you're having boredom, for me, I love the question of asking, where is this coming from? Why am I bored? Now, if you're genuinely like has worked all week long and you have no energy in your mind, like you just need to like sit there and browse social media, like that's okay. That's not a bad thing. But you have to understand where the boredom comes from.
Right.
Like analyze it. Now, if it's because you don't want to work or create, again, that's totally fine. But like, if it's hindering you to create, then it's not boredom. It could be anxiety. It could be all the other reasons that are behind it. So analyze it is what I'm saying.
Yeah, that's a good point. Boredom may not actually be the root cause.
Exactly. And perfect. So the next one we figured out is lack of knowledge, right? And my wife was listening to this audio book by Maria Forleo. The book called Everything is Figureoutable.
Everything is figureoutable.
Everything is figureoutable.
I love that.
So for the problem, creative lack of knowledge. Everything is figureoutable, for crying out loud. We live in a world of YouTube where everything is taught to us step by step.
Seriously.
Everything.
It's true. I feel like lack of knowledge in this day and age is almost not an excuse. It really isn't.
Not.
And even if you don't have the tools or you don't have whatever, the ability to go onto YouTube and type up, how do I create this? If for some reason you don't, just creating a prototype still it's going to teach you. Like, just do it. Like, who cares if you don't know how to do that?
Yeah.
A, everything's figure outable.
Right.
B, you're just creating a prototype.
Exactly. And I'll give you an example, right? Like, I went to see my dad for Father's Day past weekend, and my dad, like, shout out to him, like, super cool. He's always upping me, like, dude's into 3D printing. Like, he's into laser engraving, and I'm into laser engraving. And so anyways, I go to his house, and he's like, you want to play with it? And I'm like, yeah, for sure. Like, and so he teaches me the software and everything, and then I remember, like, I see the format of the file, and it's STL. I'm like, oh my gosh, STL, I can get that from SketchUp. And I learned SketchUp because I wanted to show my clients a 3D rendering of my woodwork. Or, you know, in the past, actually, I learned SketchUp when I was creating this interior design space for my college, and I had to do like 3 different versions, and I like nobody was paying me, and I took the time to learn SketchUp, design the whole thing, 3 different iterations of the room, so that they can like approve the room, and like all of that. It started there when I was in college, when I decided to learn SketchUp. And that took me to like my woodworking business and using SketchUp for there. And then that took me to like see my father's 3D printing software to say, that's an STL. I can get an STL from SketchUp. And all of a sudden, I am 3D printing.
That's amazing, dude.
And that's cool. Why it's like so powerful. Like, it's like you have this urge. What's the purpose? The log line was to create something, show my value. Like, hey, I know what I'm talking about. I might be a college student, but I know what I'm talking about. Let me show you. Let me just stop talking. Let me show you, to like, then like wanting to improve myself. I want to figure this out. I'll go to YouTube. I spend hours on YouTube learning that, right? And then like just to say everything is figure outable. All you need is this log line for what you're doing.
Yeah, it's so true. It's so true. The next one kind of sort of ties to the stress and release anxiety, which is just fear of failure.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people who are just they have that, like, oh, I'm going to fail. There's no way this is going to work. Well, first off, define what failure looks like.
Yeah.
Like, what does that mean that you failed?
Yeah.
Like, if you're creating a prototype, is that failure? Probably not. But
like, are you going to get deported type of failure?
Right, exactly. Like that type of failure. Most of the time, it's taken out of context and it's like way overblown. It's like, you don't even have to worry about failing, especially in light of the prototype idea. So you define what failure looks like and you compare it against your log line. And if you're staying true to your log line, then creating a prototype on the way is like, there's really very little room for failure there.
Right. It's out. It's
out. It's there. You didn't fail. You made something, you created something, you released something, whatever the case is.
Yeah. And finally, I think the creative block is the typical one you mentioned in the last episode of like in a movie, you see a writer go into this Airbnb looking and like over the typewriter typing and like nothing coming in. Like, right. Understand that if you figure out your logline process, ideas will come. Right. Yeah. And the idea thing is also there are ways to generate your creativity, like creativity. So like for me, I made a video where I was stuck in a creative rut, and I realized the only thing I need to do at this point is go outside and shoot what I'm doing. And out of that, a story birthed. And so there are ways to like get your ideas to get going, but idea scarcity and like worrying about that, it should not even be a problem in my mind, because you're a creative. You're born to create. Ideas will come, and if it doesn't come, you can start looking at what you're doing in a creative way, and there lies your idea.
It's crazy that actually works, and it's happened to me several times where I'm just like, I don't know. I have nothing, and just look in front of you and start doing something. And yeah. I loved how you just went out and started shooting. I've done that a couple times too, where I'm like, I don't know what to do. I'm just going to point my camera and record.
Yeah.
And something eventually came out.
Yeah.
And it was nothing crazy,
Yeah.
but it was a step to me becoming a better creative, flexing that creative muscle. It was a part of the prototype process.
Yeah.
And something came out of it.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. All right, I think that's where at the end of it, I just want to like summarize real quick. Like
Right,
we are
yeah.
really super like proud of like coming up with this idea of the prototype. So breaking it down real quick, the creative odyssey is the ideation process to the final thing, whatever that is. But what we are saying is, before the final thing comes the prototype, and our goal is to create the prototype. That's number one. Number two is, you're gonna create the prototype, but you have to understand why you're making it. And if you can attach the why to the initial feeling or the dopamine or the rush when you got that idea, then you are almost creative block. You're like 99.9% creative block proof at that point, because every time you lose the feeling, you go back to the log line, which is the purpose of why you're creating, which you already like carefully handcrafted this log line, this purpose to energize you to create and continue creating the prototype. So there is no pressure, there is no stress and anxiety, none whatsoever, because we are in the process of creating the prototype.
that's absolutely right. Well said.
Yeah.
And I like the idea of being creative block proof. And, I don't know if that's 100% true with this process or this idea of the prototype, but that's where I want more audience feedback. So if you're listening to this and you like this idea, apply it and see how it works in your specific situations, specifically for creative blocks. I mean, it could be like we started out with the ideation process. How does it work in that scenario?
Yeah.
And just let us know what you think.
Yeah, and so if you forgot any of these things, we came up with the easier way of understanding. The odyssey or the creative process is a journey, point A to B. But it's not directly A to B. It's point A to 8.1 to 8.2 to 8.3 to however many times you need to fix that prototype.
8.7.
Then eventually point B. So I hope this encourages you to keep creating. But yeah, until next time, keep creating, keep dreaming, and keep exploring your creative odyssey. Thank you for listening.
Thanks, everybody. Bye.